It's a beautiful day in this neighborhood, a beautiful day for a neighbor. Would you be mine? Could you be mine? It's a neighborly day in this beauty wood, a neighborly day for a beauty. Would you be mine? Could you be mine? I have always wanted to have a neighbor just like you. I've always wanted to live in a neighborhood with you, so let's make the most of this beautiful day, beautiful day. Since we're together, we might as well say, would you be mine? Could you be mine? Won't you be my neighbor? Won't you please? Won't you please? Please won't you be my neighbor?
Good morning, neighbor. So I am so glad that you could spend time with us this morning. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Aliel Zayas. So some of you may be tuning in because we started last month a 4-part series on Mr. Rogers and our neighbors. So if you did, welcome back. If you're joining us for the first time, please feel free to watch the first sermon in the comments. So specifically for this series, we're focusing on Mark 12:31. The second is this, to love thy neighbor as thyself. So in September, we broke down how we ourselves handle our emotions and our thoughts, and that the love we show ourselves will be the love that we reflect on our neighbors. So I hope over this last month, you've had a little time to reflect on that question of how do you speak to yourself and how do you ultimately treat yourself? Because this is the starting point for our ability to love others. And so this month, though, we're going to go a little bit backwards in this verse. And so today we're going to talk about neighbors of neighborhoods. And so when I started this and I kind of was going back and forth about where we should start, I realized we should probably start with the most important question. Who is my neighbor? So for me, I figured, went over a couple different places. What book should I read? What should I look at? And I realized we probably should just go ask Jesus himself because he might have a few things to say about it. And so I want to set a stage for you right now. Imagine it's a warm day. You're hanging around, you're in the center of town, and Jesus come in. You've heard about Jesus, right? The carpenter, he hangs out with tax collectors and fishermen. I've heard that he knows a few prostitutes. He's not the most savory of characters, I've heard. That's another sermon for another day. But the point is here you are, you come in, you're listening, and all of a sudden Jesus is approached by a religious scholar. This is someone who would have been known in their community. This was someone who was educated. They could read. They knew scripture better than anyone else in their community because they actually could read it. So we're going to go to Luke 10:25 through 37 to kind of see what it might have been as a bystander to overhear this exchange. Just then, a religion scholar stood up with a question to test Jesus. Teacher, what do I need to do to get eternal life? He answered, what is written in God's law? How do you interpret it? The man replied, that you love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your might, and that you love your neighbor as well as you do yourself. Good answer, said Jesus. Just go and do that and you'll live. Looking for a loophole, the pushback, I love this. He asked, and how do you define neighbor? So Jesus responded by telling a story. There once was a man traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho. On the way, he was attacked by robbers. They took his clothes, beat him up, and went off, leaving him half dead. Luckily, a priest was on his way down the same road. But when he saw the man, he angled across to the other side of the street. And then a Levite religious man showed up. He also avoided the injured man. A Samaritan traveling down the road came on him. When he saw the man's condition, his heart went out to him. He gave him first aid, disinfected, bandaged his wounds, and then he lifted him onto his donkey and led him to an inn and made him comfortable. In the morning, he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, take good care of him, and if it costs any more, put it on my bill and I'll pay you on my way back. Who do you think? Which of the 3 became a neighbor to this man who was attacked by robbers? The one who treated him kindly, the religion scholar responded. Jesus said, go and do the same. I love the Message translation of the Bible because it's a paraphrase. So it takes scripture and it breaks it down to a little more understandable terms, a little more like a story in my opinion. The story of the Good Samaritan may be one that you are already familiar with. It's what I like to call a Sunday school classic. And it was often, for me, the lesson where you were taught to be nice to our neighbors and help when you can, right? It's good to be kind. It's good to help. And that is such an important lesson, not only for adults, but for children as well. But for the purposes of today, I want to strip past that interpretation and challenge us to look and think just a little bit deeper on this. And so I want you to think of this with a little bit more context. Samaritans were unsavory characters, you should know. They weren't the type of people that you'd want to spend time with. They were considered the folks from the other side of the track. So in this situation, there's a man just walking down the street. We're going to pretend he's minding his own business, and he gets robbed and he gets beaten, and he is within an inch of his life. This man is having a rough day. But good news. There's two religious men, one right after the other, two people who love the Lord. They go to tabernacle, they go to Sabbath and observe it. And here they are, they're coming down the street. What perfect timing. If you saw these men in their community, you would know them and you would say, those are good guys. Those are great guys. But in this story, there's one thing that ties them together. They didn't stop. They walked to the other side of the street and they pretended they weren't seeing this. It was uncomfortable. It was kind of scary, I would imagine. And they had plans and they didn't want to get involved. But all of a sudden, here comes a Samaritan, a person who the man he is helping probably would not likely get caught dead with, spending time with. And yet he is the one who takes the time, who sees his pain, who sits down and helps take care of him. He takes his hard-earned money and he sets him up. He takes his time and he provides for him. He doesn't ask the man, hey, are you okay? Let me go find you help and get someone to take care of this. He sees the need and he fills it himself with what he can. He shows kindness. Kindness is a bit of a loaded word, isn't it? This morning, Mr. Rogers welcomed us to worship. Actually, for me, this is my fifth take, so he welcomed me 5 times to worship. And he set the tone for me, at least that this is a time to step back and spend some time with you. All of you are my neighbors. The reason I come every Sunday since March is not because my dad asked me to. In fact, him and Jen have both offered on occasions to help with tech so I can take time off. But I come each week because I enjoy spending time with you. I enjoy getting to sing. I enjoy joining you all for joys and concerns. I enjoy being a part of your neighborhood, even if it is virtually. And so, you know, for me, I haven't been a part of a church for a really long time. And so it's been refreshing. And so when I wrote this sermon down and thought about a neighbor, I did feel an overwhelming love towards the word kindness, which I've already mentioned. So in my humble opinion, Mr. Rogers embodied kindness. His wife, Joanne, made clear in several interviews that the man was not a saint, but he did try to be kind and he was always fast to apologize and quick to listen. And so as I was trying to find what I wanted to share for a video from him and some words of wisdom. I found a short video from World Kindness Day a few years ago. And so I am going to pause this. It's a snippet from a past interview. And I'm going to let Mr. Rogers take it away.
Let's take the gauntlet and make goodness attractive in this so-called next millennium. That's the real job that we have. I'm not talking about Pollyannish kind of stuff. I'm talking about down-to-earth, actual goodness. People caring for each other in a myriad of ways, rather than people knocking each other off all the time. I mean, I don't find that funny at all. What changes the world? The only thing that ever really changes the world is when somebody gets the idea that love can abound and can be shared. You're doing a great job.
I love the passion he gets. So in this interview, my favorite line, the absolute favorite line is, I'm not talking about the Pollyanna-ish kind of stuff. I'm talking to down-to-earth goodness. The world changes when we realize that love can be shared. What an idea. I love especially that concept. We're talking honest goodness, not something superficial, something that's real, that matters. Love can change the world. And so, as I was thinking on being a neighbor and who my neighbors were, I thought back to some of the most important neighbors that I ever had that changed my life. So in 2013, I moved to Bristol. Not a lot of people know that, but I was a resident of Vermont for about 2.5 weeks. So Dad and Carrie took the time, painted my room blue. I had just graduated from college. Everything was good. And I got there and I sat down and I realized, oh wait, I have school loans. Like, I need a job. I need to do things to make money to pay off these school loans. And so I wanted to do something that mattered, and I really wasn't sure what to do. So back during Hurricane Irene, Dad had worked with a Vista. So an AmeriCorps Vista who was actually working out of the church office, and I got to go to a couple meetings and kind of got a feel for what they did. But for me, I realized that might be an interesting choice. And so for those of you who aren't familiar with AmeriCorps, it's a government program. A VISTA represents a volunteer in service to America. So it's a 1-year commitment term. As a VISTA, you live below the poverty line, you do go on food stamps, and you go and you work in underserved populations, and you live where you're working. So within a few days, I had an interview, and within a week, I actually had been offered a position as a volunteer coordinator at the Emmaus House in Haverhill. So Emmaus is a shelter that served many different unhoused populations. So they had emergency shelters, they had a family shelter, they had transitional housing, they had housing for the elderly. They had several buildings and did a lot of really incredible things in a smaller city just outside of Boston. So part of ours is they actually offered us housing in a transitional house next door. So the emergency shelter and the building with all the development offices was across the street from the house that we were living in. And so I'm not gonna lie, when I moved there and got ready to go, I thought in my mind, this is what good people do. I'm a good person, right? I'm gonna take my year, I'm just gonna go, I'm gonna live among the poor, I'm gonna do a lot of good things, and it's gonna be incredible. That was the hardest year of my life, and I think I was probably helped more than I gave any help. The amount of learning and living that took place in my life was insane. It was the year that I learned what it meant to be a neighbor. It was the year I learned what it meant to live on my own and to genuinely trust God, because it was rough. So while I was there, I did get to be a part of a church plant called The Vine. Their services were held in community dinners and game nights, and faith was lived out by breaking table around a bed and small Bible studies. It was beautiful and taught me so many things, and is part of the reason why I went to seminary and I got to be mentored by some incredible people. And so likewise, in the shelter, I had neighbors. I had people who lived in my building, on my street, different neighbors who were living a very different life than I was. While I was sitting in offices or in the food bank or working with volunteers or working on computers or helping with events, they're combing the streets for scrap. They were staying in the library so they could stay warm, or so they could study for their GED or look for jobs. For me, it was an experience because I met a lot of different people in a lot of different ways that year, from all different sides of the story. And so one of the things that really happened to me that made an impact is I made a friend. And so her name was Sherry. I helped her study in the morning sometimes for her GED, and when she would go shopping at the pantry, I'd play with her kids and make sure she had diapers, things like that. And in exchange, she would help me sometimes go shopping and teach me how to budget, and she would listen to me. Even though we were in totally different situations, she listened to my thoughts as well and taught me, and we taught each other. It was a friendship. It was a neighbor. And so one of the most important things, though, is the last Sunday I had an opportunity to preach. It was actually the first time I ever preached. It was about 3 weeks before I moved to DC to go to seminary. And I had invited her to church, but she wasn't comfortable. She was just like, church isn't my thing. And I was like, definitely get it. So at the last Sunday, she brought the kids and she came. So I got out, I was getting ready to get into my mom's car and move. And there she was. She came just with the kids to come and give me a hug. And she had walked a mile to get there. To me, that was the truest embodiment of being a neighbor. It's going out of your way to do what you can to make sure that someone feels that they matter. And in that moment, I felt like I mattered to her. Mr. Rogers, the Good Samaritan, they had in common that they were willing to slow down and take their time and their money and their energy to give back to those who may not be able to give back in the same way. Your neighbors and your family are your mission field. Being kind is free. If that is the very bare minimum, then be kind. There is no question about it. Everyone does have something to offer. Being a good neighbor means offering what you can to fill a need. These next few weeks, people are going into fairly tense times for a lot of people. There are many uncertainties with elections, COVID cases are on the upswing, and now we've been living in this world since March. There is a lot that could cause us to be unkind or to brush off those around us. So whether you're in person having a conversation or if you're on Facebook and looking to comment, I challenge you to take a few seconds before you respond. Take the time before you say anything to ask, is this constructive? Are you saying something that will actually influence something's perspective or add to the day? Or are you saying something so you can be understood? Are you asking people what their needs are rather than just asking what you think you have around that seems it would be helpful? Are you listening and approaching conversations? And this one's really important. Are you approaching conversations without having in mind the other person's response? Are you giving people the autonomy to make their own decisions and to respect that their voices are just as important as yours? To love your neighbor as yourself, to treat others the way you want to be treated, is to help bandage their wounds and to bring to them to the innkeeper and to take care of the needs you can't fill. Being a neighbor means genuinely listening and not having to condemn or fight back or tell why your opinion needs to be heard or why you need to have the last word. Loving our neighbor as ourselves means taking the time to treat someone the way that we want to be heard. It's knowing that your goodness and your kindness comes from a place of valuing another person's life as much as your own, even if it costs you. If it costs you your time, if it costs you your pride, if it costs you listening to a perspective that you don't agree with and leaving and understanding that that's okay too. I hope you leave today, and I hope that you live as Mr. Roger asks, to make goodness an attribute that's attractive in the next millennium. Be good and be kind to each other. And thank you as always for being my neighbor. So now it's come to the best time of the day where we take a minute, just a minute. I'm gonna set up my timer right here to think for a second about the neighbors who are in our lives and the people who we interact with in the next week ahead. And what is a way that we can provide a safe space for them to listen or can engage with them in a conversation or do something just kind and nice. Maybe it's bringing a loaf of bread. I would really love if someone brought me bread. So that's what we'll go with today. So please take a minute, just a moment of silence, and just think on it for a second. Thank you. Thank you for your space and for this time. And thank you for being my neighbor, whether you're here in worship today at Bristol at 10:15, or if you're watching this a little bit later on YouTube or Facebook. Thank you so much for your time and for listening, and go out there and be kind.